All right, so you guys requested a deep dive into the story of David and Goliath, and we are going to deliver. We've got the King James version of 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're also going to be looking at this article called 9 Powerful Life Lessons from David and Goliath from Trust Tribe Ministries. But we're not just going to skim the surface here. We really want to go deep and see what we can learn about courage and faith, and maybe even how we can apply some of these lessons to our own lives.
You know, it's interesting because this story, it's not just about some shepherd boy defeating a giant. It's really about how we perceive our challenges and how our perspective can either limit us or empower us.
That's interesting. Okay, so first let's kind of set the scene here. We're in the Valley of Elah. 2 armies are facing off the Israelites and the Philistines. Each of them is camped on a mountain with this valley separating them. Now, you might be thinking, okay, classic standoff. But think about the time period. I mean, no drones, no long-range artillery. They're essentially playing by a very old-school set of rules. Terrain and positioning could mean everything.
Right, and that's what makes the arrival of Goliath so significant. He really changes the whole game. 1 Samuel describes him as 6 cubits and a span tall, which, if we're going to put that in modern terms, is well over 9 feet tall.
Wow.
Can you imagine the sheer intimidation factor? Seeing someone that size marching toward you.
I mean, it's not even just about physical strength at that point. It's psychological warfare.
Exactly. And he was decked out in full battle armor. The Bible even goes into the specifics, like how his coat of mail weighed 5,000 shekels of brass.
Which is like what?
That's over 125 pounds.
Oh, my gosh.
So, you know, it wasn't just about protection. It was about sending a message.
Yeah.
He wanted the Israelites to feel completely and utterly outmatched before the fight even began.
It's like the ultimate power move, right?
It totally
Okay,
is.
so Goliath, he strides out, and he's radiating this aura of invincibility.
Yeah.
And he shouts this challenge to the Israelites.
Yeah.
Basically saying, pick your best fighter, send him down, and let's settle this mano a mano. But here's where things get really interesting. He wasn't just challenging their army, he was challenging their God.
Right. He literally says, I defy the armies of the living God this day.
He knew exactly what buttons to push.
He did. And the Israelites' reaction, they're terrified. Not just scared, but dismayed. Like their spirit has been completely crushed.
They're demoralized.
Yeah, Goliath, by defying their court, God was making them question everything. Their faith, their beliefs, the entire worldview.
And meanwhile, far away from all this drama in the Valley of Elah, we have a young shepherd named David. He's tending his father's sheep. He's the youngest son. So no one's really expecting him to be a war hero or anything. His 3 older brothers are out there with King Saul's army. But David's world is about as far from a battlefield as you can get.
Right, and that's what makes his entrance into the story so powerful. You know, it wasn't like he was some ambitious soldier itching for a fight. He was totally removed from this whole conflict until his father sends him on this errand to deliver food to his brothers.
Simple errand.
Simple errand that turns into a life-changing encounter. When he arrives at the Israelite camp and he sees Goliath strutting around, he has a completely different reaction than everyone else. You know, they see this giant defying them, making it personal. And they just crumble under the weight of fear.
Right.
But David, he sees it as Goliath defying God, which is a huge shift in perspective.
It's huge.
Think about it. When we're facing our own Goliaths, those seemingly insurmountable challenges, do we frame them as personal attacks?
Sure.
Making us feel small and inadequate? Or do we see them as challenges to our faith, to our beliefs, to what we hold dear?
That's a really powerful way to look at it. It's almost like David, by framing it that way, removes himself from the equation and puts God at the center.
Exactly. It's not David versus Goliath. It's God versus Goliath, with David simply acting as God's instrument. And that's what gives him the courage to volunteer to fight, even though King Saul and everyone else thinks he's completely nuts. And this is where David's faith really shines through. You've got King Saul, like a seasoned warrior, decked out in his best armor, and he offers it to David. But David, this young shepherd who's probably never even held a sword before, politely declines. He's like, I can't go in this. I don't know how.
I can just picture the scene, you know, David trying to walk in this like oversized, clunky armor, probably tripping over his own feet. It's a good reminder that sometimes the most powerful tools aren't the flashy, impressive ones. You know, it's about using what we're comfortable with, what feels right.
Exactly. David was a shepherd. He knew how to use a sling. He'd spent years protecting his flock from wild animals, honing his skills, his precision, his courage, and he trusted those familiar tools, those smooth stones from the brook, more than any piece of fancy armor.
It makes you think, what are the smooth stones in our own lives?
Yeah.
What are those skills, those experiences, those things we might even take for granted that have actually been preparing us for bigger challenges?
Yeah, maybe it's that ability to connect with people or to solve problems creatively or to stay calm under pressure. We all have those unique, smooth stones that have been shaped by our experiences, even if they seem insignificant at the time.
Right. So David steps out onto the battlefield, armed with his faith, his sling, and 5 smooth stones. And Goliath, seeing this young shepherd approaching him, is totally dismissive.
Oh, yeah. He taunts David, calls him a dog, threatens to feed him to the birds.
Yeah.
It's classic bully behavior, trying to intimidate and demoralize his opponent.
Yeah, he's trying to get in his head.
Right, but David doesn't back down. In fact, he responds with this incredible declaration of faith. He's like, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head."
Wow, those are some seriously bold words. He's not just predicting victory, he's already claiming it.
Yeah.
Even before the fight begins, it's like he's saying, this isn't even about me. This is about God working through me.
Yeah, that's the power of faith, right? It's not about ignoring the danger or pretending the challenge isn't real. It's about recognizing a higher power at work, a force greater than ourselves that can help us overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable.
Absolutely. And it's a message that really resonates even today when we're facing those Goliaths in our own lives, whether it's a health crisis, a financial struggle, a relationship breakdown. It's so easy to get caught up in the fear, the doubt, the feeling of being completely overwhelmed.
Totally. But David's story reminds us to kind of shift our perspective. It's not us versus the problem, it's God with us fighting on our behalf.
Right. And that changes everything.
It does.
Okay, so the confrontation itself is short but intense. David runs towards Goliath, defying all conventional battle tactics. He puts a stone in his sling, whirls it around, and lets it fly with all his might. And that single stone, guided by faith and precision, finds its mark, sinking into Goliath's forehead.
Wow, this giant, who just moments before had seemed invincible, collapses to the ground. David then takes Goliath's own sword and cuts off his head, fulfilling his bold declaration. The Philistines, seeing their champion defeated, they flee in terror, and the Israelites, inspired by David's courage, pursue them and win the day.
It's such a powerful image, this young, seemingly insignificant shepherd taking down this mighty warrior. But it's not just about the physical victory, right? It's about the triumph of faith over fear, of courage, over intimidation. And that's a message that's resonated throughout history, inspiring people from all walks of life to face their own giants.
Right, and what's interesting is that the Trust Tribe Ministries article takes the story even further. They
Right.
don't just leave it at the feel-good victory. They actually break down the key takeaways, the practical lessons we can apply to our own lives, even if we're not facing literal giants.
Yeah, because we all have those Goliaths. We have to deal with those situations that make us want to run and hide, those challenges that seem impossible to overcome. So how do we channel that David-like courage? How do we choose faith over fear? How do we use what we have, even if it doesn't seem like much?
That's what we're going to unpack next. We're going to take those timeless lessons from David and Goliath and try to translate them into practical strategies for facing those giants in our own lives. We're back and ready to tackle the big question. How do we take these ancient lessons from David and Goliath and actually apply them to our modern lives? Because let's be real, most of us aren't going up against literal giants with swords and shields.
Right. But the Trust Tribe Ministries article, they make this really interesting point. They say, don't be too spiritual, do your part. It's easy to fall into that trap of thinking, well, if it's all in God's hands, I just need to sit back and wait for a miracle. But that's not what we see with David. He still had to pick up those stones, aim that sling, and put in the effort.
Exactly. It's like a partnership, right? We trust in a higher power, but we also take action using the skills and resources we've been given.
Right. Faith without works is dead, as they say.
Exactly. And sometimes those works come from the most unexpected places. Remember, David's training ground for facing Goliath wasn't some elite warrior academy?
Right. It's the quiet hillsides where he tended his sheep.
Exactly. Learning to be patient, observant, and resourceful.
Okay, so think about your own life for a second. What are those seemingly mundane experiences that might actually be shaping you for bigger things? Maybe it's that volunteer work you do, or that side hustle you're building, or even that difficult relationship you're navigating. We never know how those things are honing our skills, building our resilience, and preparing us to face our own Goliaths.
Right, and those smooth stones we talked about earlier, they're often hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
Maybe it's your ability to connect with people or to think outside the box or to stay calm under pressure. We all have these unique strengths, these gifts, these experiences that have shaped us. It's about recognizing them, owning them, and using them.
It's so important because it's easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves to others, focusing on what we lack and feeling inadequate. But David's story reminds us that God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called.
That's good. And sometimes that qualification comes through struggle, through setbacks, through those moments when we're forced to lean on something bigger than ourselves. It's in those challenges that we discover our true strength, our resilience, and our capacity for courage.
So how do we tap into that courage when we're staring down our own Goliaths? I think another key takeaway from the Trust Tribe Ministries article is about perspective. The Israelites saw Goliath as defying them, and they were paralyzed by fear. David saw Goliath as defying God, and it ignited his faith and fueled his courage.
Right, that shift in perspective is huge.
Mhm.
When we remember that we're not alone in this fight, that there's a power greater than ourselves working on our behalf, those problems start to look a lot smaller. It doesn't mean the challenges disappear, but it gives us the strength to face them head on.
And speaking of perspective, let's not forget about the naysayers. David's own brother Eliab criticized him, questioned his motives, and tried to discourage him. We all have those voices in our lives, those people who tell us we're not good enough, not smart enough, not whatever enough.
But David didn't let those negative voices deter him. He knew his purpose, he trusted in God, and he went for it. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to ignore the doubters, to silence those inner critics, and to step out in faith, even when it feels scary.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the story of David and Goliath,
Mm.
I want to leave you with a challenge. What are your 5 smooth stones? What are the skills, experiences, and resources you can draw upon to face those giants in your own life? Take some time to reflect on that. You might be surprised at what you discover.
Yeah, and remember, you are not alone in this fight. There's a power greater than yourself fighting for you, alongside you, and within you. And sometimes the most ordinary things can become extraordinary weapons in the hands of faith.
What a powerful thought to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the timeless story of David and Goliath. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.